Let's cast some shadows in Blender. I'm making this one for me as much as I am for you because I'm going to forget how to do this, and I'll need to watch my own video to remember all the little steps. So casting shadows with a Gobo, basically the digital equivalent of a Gobo, a pattern template in Blender, is actually pretty easy to do. But like a lot of things in Blender, it's not a matter of whether it's kind of working and I just kind of massage the numbers a little bit to get it to work better. No, it's one of these things where if you get one of these steps wrong, it doesn't work at all. So that's why you need to make sure that all these little boxes are checked basically. And I'm going to show you where all those boxes are. How to do this both in Cycles and an Evee. In Evee, it's a little bit of a workaround, but it works in both views. So here's a quick little cycle render of this Gobo. So what I keep on using this weird word Gobo. What is Gobo? Well, Gobo is used as a little stainless steel disc about 4 inches in diameter that drops inside of a stage light. And we call them Gobos in theater, but they're called cookies in film and television. The generic term is a pattern template. So you might hear a lot of different names for what these are. And so you put this little steel object into the middle of the light, right where the focal point of the light, the rays are crossing in an ellipsoidal reflector spotlight, and then you get this on the outside. You get this sort of pattern being projected into the scene. And we can do the exact same thing here in Blender. So here is Blender in Cycles. I'm going to start off with the Cycles one. So I'm in the Cycles. Nothing really too fancy that you need to do over here in the Render tab, but what we really need to do is work with the light. So I have the light object selected over here. I'm going to click on this little light bulb over here, and I see I put in a spotlight into my scene, and it's just shining down onto my little set here, and I'm getting this result, which is pretty good. So one of the things, and when I was trying to remember how to redo this, how to remember how to do this the other day, and I was struggling with it, and it's like, why is this not working? And I just came in here, kind of did that, rage thing that we do, and we start just running sliders up and down. And the one that I was running these up and down, what the heck is going on? And then I grabbed this and I went like, oh well, there it is. And that's the radius slider. And I actually had to stop and say, well, what is radius again? And I was sort of misunderstanding what radius was all this time. I was thinking it was kind of like the sphere of influence of the light, like how far does that light influence the scene? That's not what it is at all. Radius is the size of the emitter of the light, which makes perfect sense that we would want this to be a very small number to get these sharp edges, because when we do this in the real world, we put that piece of steel inside the light, right where the light is, it's called a gate, the point where the light is most focused, the beams are lighter than most focused. If you just hold up one of these in front of a floodlight, it doesn't do anything. It's the shadow is just a little blurry blob. You don't see any of the details. You have to have it where the beams of light are super crisp. So obviously, if we lower that radius way down, in this case to 0, we get a perfect sort of black and white image here. We get parts that are lit and parts that are not lit. But if we move this guy up, well, here, I'll just move it up to like 0.44 here, just a little tiny bit. Like so many of these settings in Blender, a very small number is going to completely ruin the effect. And you're like, well, I see a little kind of vague cloudiness or something, but that's about it. So yeah, you really want to almost sort of start at 0. And then if you don't want it to be that crisp, you can come here and just kind of click it forward a little bit. I think as soon as you start hitting like the double digits at 0.0, like there we go, 0.01. Here, I'll go back to 0.01. You're getting a very soft effect over here. So just be aware of that number needs to be really small. Also notice too that down over here we have the size of the light. So I have this set to a 50 degree, which is a pretty wide. I mean, there are 50 degree spotlights. They're kind of expensive and big, but usually they're going to be a little bit smaller than that. But you can cheat in the virtual world and make this pretty much any size you want. Do be aware that Blend here, what Blend is doing is it's sort of fuzzing the edges of it, right? So if you wanted to have, the Gobo wasn't in here, and you wanted this really hard, kind of cabaret style spotlight, around your figure where there's a really hard edge here, where you would set that blend to a very low number. This is basically the field and beam angle blur here around the edges of it. So if you want that kind of soft edge there, raise that number a little bit. If you want it to be a real crisp drop off, you can do that. I'll show you how to use the show cone thing too here when we move over to the Evee. But how do where's this cookie living? Where is the Gobo in the scene? Well, we have to jump over here to the shading tab. So you want to go ahead and use the nodes here. Let's maximize this so we can see what we're doing down over here. Use the nodes for your light object. So you're basically giving your light object a material, basically. When you do that, if you say use nodes on your light object, you get these two for free, emission and the light output. And then these three over here, if you have Node Wrangler, just select your emission tab there and say Control T to get these three here in here by default. I've added the invert in here in between afterwards, and I'll explain why. But here's where this all starts to get kind of persnickety. So first of all, the image texture in here, this number is the name of the catalog number of the Gobo that I downloaded. I just went to the internet and downloaded a Gobo and took it into Photoshop and selected the white parts of the image and deleted them, and then put it on a transparent background, saved it as a PNG so it has an alpha channel, and then that's just literally the catalog number on that. Nothing fancy to do there. You can play around with whether or not repeat or extended is the best option here. I have it set to repeat in this one because sometimes if you switch over to extended, it just disappears entirely, or extended will kind of just stretch the one image and it won't repeat it. So again, you can play around with those and see what results you get that are the best from that. Again, I just got mine set to non-color right now because it's a black and white, it's alpha image, but I think you can actually project color images as well, like a slide projector. So you don't necessarily have to have this in non-color. It does work in RGB as well. But over here is the first of the things that we need to make sure that we're doing correctly. Normally, when we have the texture coordinates, it's defaulted to UV. And sometimes we use object, but we don't normally use normal. So you need to make sure that you move up here to the normal output and then and put that into your mapping over here, or this won't work. You may need to massage the location a little bit here. It may not be exactly centered in the circle of light. You may have to move it around a little bit, of course, so you can rotate it, just like we do in the real world when we spin a Gobo and change its orientation as it's projecting on the floor or whatever. And of course, so you can scale it up or down depending on your needs there. So I've made mine slightly bigger. The other really important thing that you need to be aware of is that we have to take this out of the alpha channel. Again, by default, it's coming out of the color channel, right? Well, we need to take the alpha channel and bring that into either directly into our emission or into the invert that I have in here, and I'll show you why that is in a second. But this is because we're just using basically the positive and negative spaces of the image here, so it's important that it's coming out of the alpha channel for this to work. So if I go back into the scene here, and we'll get caught up a bit, the invert that I've got going on here is just so that you can control whether or not you're seeing the inside or the outside of the Gobo. So here I've just run it in the other direction, and here if I flip it back over that way, this is the way it would normally appear. This is kind of like all the empty space around the object, and these are the actual the white spots here are the steel bits, the lit bit are the steel bits, so it actually needs to be inverted in order for it to look the way that it would look if we use this actual object in a stage light. So that's the Cycles version of this. So let's switch over here to Evee, and you'll see immediately when I switch over to Evee that whole effect just disappears. It just turns into this sort of like hard-edged circle of light. So what I'm going to do is just turn off that Cycles light over here, and I'm going to find my Evee light, turn that on, and we're just going to bring that into the scene here. So let me grab it over here, and you can already sort of see the trick that it's doing here. What I've got in this scene, the workaround for Evee is to, in fact, I'm just going to switch back to layout because we don't need any nodes for this to work. I've got basically I've just put something in front of the light, in a pretty basic way of doing it. Same kind of spotlight. Also true that you absolutely have to have this radius lower down, and actually it's even more important in Evee because if you bring it up a little, it just turns into, I don't know what that is. So it works really a lot better in Evee with, I'm messing with the specular here, not with the radius. So oops, so it looks nice and crisp right there, and then a little bit, like just a tiny little bit of blur, and you start to get all this sort of like double image thing. It looks a little blur and like a little like, you had too much to drink or something, not soft. So this works best in Evee as a nice hard-edged or slightly blurred edge, I think. The reason why the show cone, I think, is useful here is I've actually put this object in here that is a image as plane object with this image. I'll talk more about that in a second. But the show cone is really useful for lining it up onto the image. So you can basically see, where the light is intersecting with that object. So that can be useful while you're setting it up. So what is this thing? This is just basically an image as plane. I just brought it in. I took this in, went into Photoshop, created a little square image, put it on a transparent background, just took the brush and kind of painted on the shape really quickly, saved it as a PNG, and brought it in as an alpha channel. In fact, it's even like, you could look at this like kind of like scalloped edges over here of the shadows in there and think like, oh, that's a problem with Blender. No, actually that's my fault for going too fast when I was painting these. I had my brush repeat kind of set to low, and so this is actually my Photoshop brush being repeated, creating that little scalloping edge in there. So that's an artifact of the original image, not something that Blender is doing. But when you bring in an image that's plane, remember, it's not going to work unless when you have that object selected, you scroll down over here. And normally we're really worrying about the blend mode for the outside edge. If we're doing a plant or something, or a person's, figure we really want that edge to be nice and crisp. Here, that's less important. I mean, we don't want it to be opaque, but it can be pretty much anything that isn't opaque. But the shadow mode, I think it's best to go up to alpha hashed, which I think is the best one there, and that's just getting a nice crisp shadow that is coming out of this. So if we had to switch to the default opaque, we're just getting nothing because it's not letting any of the light through. None obviously is going to ignore it entirely. So we definitely want to be either in alpha clipped or alpha hashed, and it doesn't seem to be a huge bit of difference, but I think the alpha hash just has a little bit more gentle, a little less pixelated look to the edge there. And that's basically the stuff that you need to make sure is turned on to make this work in Evee. This also works in Cycles as well. So the same kind of hacky workaround trick works in Cycles. And you can kind of mix and match them in Cycles for whichever makes the most sense for what you're doing. So hopefully this is a great way for you to start creating, really interesting God rays, all kinds of interesting shadows into your scene, or just kind of the theatrical effect of patterns of light on your surfaces in Blender. Hopefully that is useful to you, and hopefully it'll be useful to me when I go watch this video 6 months from now and I've completely forgotten how to do this again. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.